Hello everyone, this is Scarzig, and today we're going to be doing a Duelyst patch review. This normally isn't my style, as many of you know, but this patch actually has a lot of balance changes in it. This is something that the community has been eagerly awaiting for some time. The devs have managed to keep the contents of this patch under wraps, so kudos to them. But once I saw that this patch actually did include balance changes, once I actually saw the scope of those changes, I decided that I really wanted to kind of go over my reactions to this patch and also, talk about these changes a little bit. I'm not going to, read this thing to you out loud. I would recommend you read it yourself. Take your time to really drink this in. This first section here about their philosophy regarding the balance changes, I think is a very good read, talking about how, and I also touched on this a little bit, how a lot of changes, such as inner focus, right, were made in anticipation of things that are going to be released in the future, right? The developers would want to prep the community, so to speak, for those changes. Like, by the time any crazy minion comes out that we go, oh man, if inner focus still costed 0 mana, I could totally see this 1 or 2 new minions they just released being really broken. So now I understand why the nerf was made, right? They want to prep the community so that we're already used to inner focus being 1 mana, just again as an example. But they're saying that they're going to cut down on that. They want us to still have our fun toys all the way up until they are forced to nerf them with the new expansion. So overall, I think that that's pretty positive, right? Because we still get to play our fun decks. We still get to do all kinds of janky fun stuff. And then with not only a new patch being released or a new expansion or what have you, there's also going to be balance changes made to things that are currently in the game to make room and, kind of help out the cohesiveness of these new cards. And then that's just going to create even more upheaval in the meta. And for somebody like me, that's what I really live for, right? When everybody's trying to figure out what's going on, like after Ancient Bonds was released and everybody was trying out all kinds of Golem and Arcanist stuff, figuring out what works, what's the right mixture. But anyway, enough about the preamble. Let's get to the damn balance changes. So right off the bat, we've got Enfeeble changed from 3 mana to 5 mana. This card, I think, has been very heavily discussed. One of the reasons I don't think... Here's the thing. This card has been... Everybody's been talking about this card. It needs nerfed. Making its mana cost increase to 5 has been a change that has been suggested over and over and over again in the past, and I'm really glad that the developers decided to go with this one. Enfeeble has been problematic for a long time, and the reason it hasn't been, if Meltdown wasn't in the game and tanking all of the hate for the meta, right? Like, Meltdown is Assault Sink. Everybody's going to latch onto that card and use it for memes and pasta and use it to let their frustrations out. And this sort of overshadowed the talk of Enfeeble a little bit. In my opinion, at least we'll say the Enfeeble, in my opinion, needs to be nerfed on the same level Meltdown does. But people weren't talking about this as vocally. It wasn't as prescient, I think is the right word, on like the Duelyst subreddit, right? This would always come up in people's balance suggestion compilations. However, there were a few players who called it right off the bat, of course, that Enfeeble was going to be absolutely insane at 3 mana and that it was going to be no fun, and it definitely proved to be just that. I think maybe the developers went with 3 mana to begin with because they felt perhaps that having to combine it with Blistering Scorn or things like that, or Blood Tier Alchemist, would like artificially increase the mana cost of Enfeeble, like using it as a board clear, and it would be too slow, or the fact that Enfeeble doesn't stop dying wishes would make it, not as ridiculous. But that simply, again, wasn't the case because Van R had Enfeeble to just destroy a board no matter what size it was, no matter what they were going up against. And then they still had Aspect of the Fox and Chromatic Cold to get around Dying Wishes. So they really had like the perfect combination. They had the perfect soup of removal boiling in all of their decks to just deal with any situation. And so now with Enfeeble costing 5 mana, they're going to have to commit a lot more to clearing your board. And with it being 5 mana, players will be a lot more comfortable playing around it. Just think of it sort of like Plasma Storm, right? Where your minions get nerfed down to 1/1s. Their minions also get nerfed down, but usually Vanar will trade in their illusions or whatever, or then they can like Warbird your stuff down. So really great change in my opinion. Enfeeble, I still dislike what it does, but at the very least, as long as it's not happening all the time, then it should be good. The fact that it comes down later again, and that it gives them less mana to combo with to clear up your board is going to be great, so that we can actually, get a board established against them. And they sort of go into that here, not as long-winded as I just did. Shadow Sister Kalino, this was a nerf. Shadow Sister Kalino was a card that I have personally hated for a long time. The fact that if you let it stick, even aggressive decks couldn't out damage Kalino's healing potential, so it absolutely needed to be dealt with, right? And so with Kalino now being a 3/3 for 4 mana, that is an enormous nerf. I didn't know what they would be able to do to this card to make it so that it wasn't getting so much value. The thing is that if it ever stuck to the board, you almost lost like 100% of the time, right? Because it was super hard to get through all of the Abyssal Juggernauts and all of the now Arcanists, like the huge Owlbeast Sages, to get at this backline threat if you didn't take care of her almost immediately. Now with Shadow Sister Kalino being a 3/3, it sort of takes away her weakness to natural selection. She'll still, of course, die to Plasma Storm, which is fine. Phoenix Fire now deals with Shadow Sister Kalino. And this is going to be a minion. Saberspine Tiger kills Shadow Sister Kalino now. It dies to Warbeast now. So this, in my opinion, really flips the Abyssian Magmar matchup on its head. Kalino used to be one of the deciding factors for like an aggro Voth list going up against a Cassava, right? Because it would come down to if Cassava can get a Kalino to stick and Voth wasn't able to deal with it in time, or wasn't able to deal with it without dumping way too many resources into doing so, then Cassava would just run away with the game. There was even instances where you would have Cassava down to red health and playing a Kalino and then using Abyssal Scar, Void Pulse, and then maybe doing a couple minion trades plus hitting with her general would just heal you for so much, and it was ridiculous. So with Kalino now being a 4 mana 3/3, it's going to be used more in that sense, where you play it down and cash in a bunch of stuff to get a burst of heal, rather than it just being a backline tanky utility unit that's just going to sit there and get like so much crazy long-term value. And again, and also with 5 HP was just super hard to take down unless you had extremely specific answers for it. 5 HP is such a critical stat line. Way back in the day, Earth Sister Tegeti was a 4 mana 3/5, and that 5 HP, which was just letting her usually live through a lot of removal that would one-shot her, and it would allow her to get an additional rotation because of Tegeti's very strong effect. That additional rotation of AoE damage was way too much for decks to deal with, and so I'm really glad that the 5 HP stat line is now being respected a lot more. People realize what a strong break point that is to survive Warbeast, Lava Slasher, that kind of stuff. Holy Immolation, like there's so much strong AoE in the game that deals 4 damage that giving something 5 HP needs to be like a very, very weighty decision. So all in all, I am really glad to see this change. I was also worried that Kalino was a bit too much of a crutch for control Abyssian lists, because Swarm Abyssian can substitute in Shadow Dancers, and Kalino in a lot of ways was basically what allowed Cassiva to guarantee a late game and then get her obliterates off. So I'm really curious to see how this nerf is going to affect Shadow Creep Cassiva lists, because again, it really heavily affects the Magmar matchup, or really any aggressive matchup in general. And so I don't know if Cassiva is going to be able to get to the late game as consistently, is what I'm saying, because basically Kalino was pretty much just a Cassiva card because it was so easy to get those procs with Abyssal Scar. I like the nerf, but I'm just like really curious to see how it's going to shake out for Abyssian in the long run, especially because it's basically, as I said, a combo piece. And going down here, we've got Thumping Wave increased to 4 mana. Now this is very interesting because Thumping Wave being 4 mana is what it's going to do is it's going to cut off a lot of late game out of hand combos, right? Because Macantor Thumping Wave is 9 mana, and that was used as a big burst finisher, right? To just get that last little bit of damage you needed to kill your opponent. So that will no longer work without Flash Reincarnation. Elucidator Thumping Wave is still going to be a thing, but with Thumping Wave being 4 mana, doing shenanigans plus double Thumping Wave is not going to be as prevalent, right? And so overall, that's pretty much what this nerf does, is it takes away that specific late game combo, and it makes it so that you can't do double Thumping Wave. Like even Saberspine Tiger Thumping Wave was 9 mana, and so this specifically takes away those late game combos where you could just have a Thumping Wave in hand, or have a Thumping Wave and a Rush minion in hand, and then you draw or replace into the second Thumping Wave, or vice versa. However, where if you have 2 Thumping Waves in hand and then you get a Rush minion, you basically guarantee lethal a lot of ways. So we're seeing again a nerf to Shadow Sister Kalino affecting the matchup, and then we see a nerf to Thumping Wave that is also powering down on aggro Magmar. Furthermore, with Thumping Wave being a 4 mana spell, when Magmar uses it on removal, they're going to have less leftover mana to follow up with developing the board, right? They turn your minion into a 3/3, but then they can't follow up as strongly, right? Because we've seen the play where Magmar might be able to play a 2-drop, Thumping Wave your threat, and then have an extra mana left over to overload, get +1 attack, and then that allows their general to trade into the kin. So with Thumping Wave being 4 mana as well, if you catch them on a really awkward turn, Magmar's not going to be able to Thumping Wave and also overload in the same turn to kill the rabbit as reliably. So I do like this change. It doesn't look very severe, right? Because a lot of people were asking for the attack plus to be nerfed to only giving like +3 or +4 attack. But this change overall like really nerfs the card's overall versatility and like just ability to close out games while still being, that flip where it's either a defensive or an offensive thing. And now that they can't get double Thumping Wave as easily, we'll see if the +5 attack is still going to be too strong. Because I mean, what is it called? Wailing Overdrive gives +5, right? And that's a 4 mana spell. So this is sort of more in line with other buffs in the game. Furthermore, with Thumping Wave costing 4 mana, it's less value to just throw it onto any sort of body you have laying around just to get a big face hit in, like, because again you can't combo it as easily with an additional body on the board or being able to overload in the same turn. Like, so I think that this is actually a very smart change, not one that I initially would have probably thought of. Again, people were talking about mostly from what I saw, we'll say we're asking for an attack value change where we're just going to give again, +3 or +4, but this is very solid in my opinion for Thumping Wave, and it's going to be also held in the hand a lot more, specifically for answering certain cards, where depending on the matchup, you want to hold your Thumping Waves as removal, or you want to save them for burst in the late game. So that's going to add more thinking to aggro Voth, which sometimes when you get and that's with all aggro decks, sometimes you just get the perfect draw and you don't really have to think, right? So Thumping Wave at least rewards a bit of matchup knowledge and a bit of forethought. So that this nerf is really doing a lot, really hitting a lot of good notes for me. And moving on, we've got a nerf to Flash Reincarnation. Now, this one was definitely a no-brainer. Basically, they've changed this card just so that you can't double flash something. They made it so that if the next card you play this turn is a minion, the effect activates. So you can no longer double flash a huge late game threat. No more Juggernaut memes, no more Chimera memes, no more going all in on Silithar Elder, which doesn't really happen as often as it used to, and wasn't really a great play back when it was actually possible. It was something that would happen every once in a while, but it wasn't as ridiculous as Juggernaut or Chimera, right? Nobody really does it with Chimera. Juggernaut's the main offender, of course, because not only are you getting a huge body on the board with Grow, it's also spawning eggs that you also have to deal with. And so it was near impossible for players to have the resources to deal with the Juggernaut, to dispel the Juggernaut, kill it, and kill all the eggs. Like, you had to have very specific answers in your hand. So I really like this change for sure, because you still get to do your Sunsteel thing, you still get to, you know, ramp out your War Beast, all that jazz. But again, this keeps the card the way it is, because Magmar using Flash Reincarnation is really core to their playstyle, and it just cuts away that extremely degenerate edge case. Because let's be real, double Flash Juggernaut is very unlikely, but you know, again, when it does happen, you just insta win, and that's not cool. And what else did I want to say about this change? Oh yeah, I had mentioned how Flash Sunsteel is basically core to the Magmar identity, right? Because they don't have good 3-drops, so being able to use Flash Reincarnation and bring out 4-drops early is very good for them. Flash Sunsteel, Flash Spelljammer are two recent examples. Well, two key examples, I would say. So really good change here, keeping the identity of the card and just taking away that cancer. And moving along, we have a Crystalis Burst nerf. Now, for those of you who've been playing this game for a long time, Crystalis Burst used to be a meme card. It didn't see play at all. Like, it was funny to like run it like it just on a regular ladder deck, right? Every once in a while, somebody would play a Crystalis Burst and get a Silithar Elder or something, and you would just lose. And so like it was back in the day when everybody would just kind of laugh at it and go, well, that's really unlucky. And then you would just move on. It would be like when your opponent gets like a turn 2 or turn 3 Mechazor, right? Where it's like, well, it's just unlucky. You just move on. And then, you know, Blistering Scorn came out and Crystalis Burst was played less and less. And then after the Blistering Scorn nerf, that card started to sink out of the meta. Blood Tier Alchemist isn't played as much as it used to. Be, so fewer factions have answers, clean answers to Crystalis Burst. You need to be running Tempest, Ghost Lightning, that kind of thing. But often Crystalis Burst would come out on very awkward turns in the mid game, where not only do you have to deal with Magmar's board, but then you also have to deal with Crystalis Burst on top of it, and it would put you in this horrible catch-22 where stopping what you're doing to deal with the Crystalis Burst would make you lose way too much tempo. And I actually used this card specifically for this purpose in the last expansion, right? Where Crystalis Burst, I was playing it in the Blistering Scorn meta because I knew I wanted my opponent to just answer the Crystalis Burst and basically spend a turn doing just that. And it would almost allow me to pass a turn and then get to the late game a bit more reliably. I was using it as a red herring to slow down my opponent, but now, because of meta shifts, Crystalis Burst is getting a lot more hatching done. Before, like, the average eggs that would hatch was only like you would get 1 or 2 But now you're more likely to get all of your eggs to hatch. And because more minions have been added to the Magmar pool, such as Juggernaut, such as Lava Slasher, right, such as Mandrake, all of these new minions that have been added to the potential grabs for Crystalis Burst has made the potential value of its randomness really, really high. So it's like very rarely are you going to get like really, really crappy pools from Crystalis Burst nowadays. Now it really comes down to the location of the eggs, and that's just way too swingy. And again, it was always that way, but before the average of the minions you would actually get was much lower. Like you would get a lot worse stuff. Even like you would get like Young Silithar, and then like Vindicator, Veteran Silithar, and then maybe a Mechantor Warbeast or a Spirit Harvester or something. And even if they weren't in good locations, it wasn't good enough. And I also talked about how Crystalis Burst, because of cards like Wild and Scepter, which is a 4-mana 3/3, and like Morin Kerr, right? Cards that have abilities that hatch eggs were intentionally overcosted so that you couldn't combo with Crystalis Burst as easily, and so you couldn't do those combos as early in the game. It was really constraining the space around what they could actually add to the egg synergy, right? To Eggmar decks, which was something that I had explored at length during the last expansion. It was really fun deck. But again, Crystalis Burst, I had like narrowed down as the culprit of limiting what they could do with that deck. So now with it being nerfed to 6 mana, it's not going to come down in the mid game and decide right away on turn 2, because you just play your big 3-drop into, Crystalis Burst, or you play turn 3-drop, 4-drop, and then on turn 5 you Crystalis Burst Overload or something, right? So this being 6 mana, it's going to be like probably a late game Hail Mary-ish play, and you're also going to want to use this for combos or something. You really can't combo with this anymore, because on 9 mana doing Crystalis Burst plus Morin Kerr was sort of like a burst finisher for Eggmar decks. Nowadays you might, and again with Eggmorph costing 4, you can't do that anymore. You can do Crystalis Burst, Flash, Reincarnation, Wild, and Scepter to hatch your favorite egg, and it can move and attack right away. Crystalis Burst is going to be a really great follow-up if you equip a Morin Kerr and you get that artifact to stick. Then you follow up with the Crystalis Burst, and that's really what they're trying to do here. And I appreciate this change to cut down on the variance of Magmar, cut down on the variance of Eggmar in general, and open up more space for the future, because it was a deck that I thought was pretty fun when I was playing it. Oh, and they actually say as much here. By moving Crystalis Burst to 6 mana, players will have more time to prepare for it and will be able to support eggs in much more interesting and powerful ways going forward. Now this nerf, look at this shit. I was not expecting this at all. Windblade Adept got nerfed, and I was like, really? Yeah, so let that just sink in real quick while I drink some water. Windblade Adept. This card has been around since the beginning of Duelyst. This is like the original OG minion, right? I believe Un7, right, the main art director for Duelyst, who does all the pixel stuff, I think if I'm remembering correctly, Windblade Adept was like the first attack animation they did. Like, this is an old school unit. This is like one of the core like faces of Duelyst, and it's getting a nerf. I was like really taken aback when I saw this change. Once I scrolled down and I saw the Windblade Adept, that's when I put my phone down and said I need to record a video about these patch notes. Like, they're going ham. I don't even know what's coming after this. Like I said, this is where I stopped. But Windblade Adept is getting nerfed. So I really haven't had enough time to stew on this change. Windblade Adept being a 3/3 is still fantastic. You still get to one-shot 2-drops, which is the thing. I think that they were worried about Windblade Adept being able to kill 4 HP stuff, right? And so that made it that any 3-drops they made would have to have more than 4 HP, so that Lionar walking forward playing a Windblade Adept, you couldn't contest the center against them and play a 3-drop, because it would most likely just die to Windblade Adept, or it would die to like Windblade Adept plus the enemy general, right? Because that would mean that you would have to play a 3-drop with 7 HP for it to technically survive. And so when your opponent opened up with Windblade Adept, you were forced to take a defensive position, or which is, I suppose, referred to as the turtle opening, where you step up diagonally and threaten like the top or the bottom mana tile, depending on where they played their Windblade Adept. Or you walked forward, played a 2-drop on the center tile, and then used a 2-mana removal spell to deal with the Windblade Adept in some fashion. Demonic Lore, Lasting Judgment, something like that. You could even, in a pinch, Hearth Sister to swap the Windblade Adept away and then hit it, and then take it out of Zeal range so it can't get a value trade. So nerfing Windblade Adept so that it just gains +1 and becomes a 3/3 is still decent. A 2-mana 3/3 is a good stat line. Furthermore, with Argion's ability to roar Windblade Adept, you're no longer using a 2-drop to kill things with 6 HP. You're no longer using a 2-drop to punch your opponent in the face for 6 as easily. And that's honestly, it's a really good choice. And down here they're saying that they, wow, let's not spoil that, but down here they say that it will remain a powerful option without preventing other 2-cost minions from seeing play. I was never worried about Windblade Adept like knocking other 2-drops out of the meta. Like, there's not much to choose from at the moment. Like Windblade Adept, Azurite Lion, Healing Mystic, Primus Fist. Depending on what deck you're running, you throw in Ephemeral Shrouds, Cryptographer. Yeah, like generally that's pretty much like what you're dealing with as Lionar. So again, I guess this is just opening up space for future Lionar 2-drops. So it'll be interesting to see what designs they go with from here. I mean, Golem Metallurgist is a 2-drop, Celebrant. But anyway, not getting sucked too deep down into the what is the nature of 2-drops philosophical argument. The points that I went over, I think, really speak to more why this nerf is really good for the game. Just because Windblade Adept threatened a lot more value than maybe a 2-drop should be getting. This is going to be a really big hit to Tempo Argion, though, I think, because not being able to threaten your opponent out of the center as reliably might kill their ability to take control of the board early, as that deck really likes to do. But Tempo Argion is sort of on its way out of the meta after the slow nerf, and we're seeing that Tempo Argion, which I thought would be like a decent fast deck that could still deal with a lot of these boards that are showing up, like these board states, really doesn't have the juice anymore to close out games against Arcanists. I have noticed that struggle quite a bit, because your opponent can just play something really big that you can't deal with, or if they have any sort of healing, which Trinity Wing provides to all Arcanist lists, Tempo Argion was really struggling anyway. So it feels kind of weird to like see an additional nerf on top of a deck that's already struggling. But if a deck is, not seeing play, then at the very least you can just make it a little bit weaker, and it's just going to prep for the future, I guess. They talked a little bit in the beginning about how they don't want to make nerfs specifically to prep for the future, so this does seem a little bit counterintuitive. They probably could have waited on this change, right? They probably could have waited on this change, I think, because again, Tempo Argion isn't running rampant right now, probably on ladder, but not so much in tournament play. But people are still going to run Windblade Adept, because there's no other 2-drops that you're just going to be, oh, Windblade Adept got nerfed, so I'm going to use this other 2-drop instead, because it's still a 2-mana 3/3, which is better than playing you know, let's say you replace your Windblade Adepts for Primus Fist, and then that way you get to use that to attack and float it over to other minions, right? But if you need a turn 1 play, you don't want to miss out on your opening gambit with Primus Fist. So Windblade Adept's still going to get played. So unexpected change, potentially very mistimed change, but I can see the long-term benefits of this change. Next we see Grandmaster Noshrak. This I kind of want to read. Oh god, Meltdown nerfs. Meltdown nerfs, boys. We'll get to that in a second, but I just want to read up on the context of this Noshrak nerf because I don't see why this one is a big deal. Tempo Xerix that just like beats your face in, like Face Monkey Xerix, usually doesn't rely on Grandmaster Noshrak because if your opponent gets to 7 mana, you're probably going to lose anyway. And so they would just usually run something else in their late game slot. Amara Healer's probably at the very tippy top of a deck like that. Usually they cap out at Nimbus and kind of rely on that value engine to carry them through the last little legs of the game. Grandmaster Noshrak has an extremely powerful and often immediate effect that ends the game quickly for Vitruvian players. At 7 mana, it's difficult to give Vitruvian new high-impact minions when their damage could effectively be doubled the following turn. By moving Noshrak to 8 mana, there will be a bit more breathing room before the Grandmaster comes online. Okay, so this, again, is just prepping for the future. They mentioned, again, in the opening paragraph about how they're making nerfs to open up design space for factions, and I think they mean to say that after this patch they're no longer going to be doing let's open up design space reasons. They'll still be able to have those nerfs internally and then design around those, and then finally, as I mentioned earlier, once those nerfs are needed, they'll just drop at the same time as all of the other stuff that an unnerfed version of the card would normally make too strong. So this is again, they're prepping for the future, perhaps a little bit poorly timed. I wasn't really running Noshrak in any of my Vitruvian decks. I know that it does come down in the late game to, to help you close out games if things have really come to a grinding halt and you're playing Xerix or Saj or whatever, and you can't close the game out. Your opponent creates space and they're sitting over on the other side of the board and you're like, what the hell am I going to do? And so you just drop Noshrak. It has Blast and Flying. They can't play around it. If they don't have an answer, they'll take 8 face damage and maybe lose. I haven't really seen a play where Grandmaster Noshrak drops down while Vitruvian has a board and then they just kill you with double damage, because it's like if Vitruvian has a board, they have other ways that they can just burst you out with Fireblaze, Obelisk, Whisper of the Sands, Saberspine Tiger. Like, an aggressive Xerix deck is going to be running more burst, just split up into other cards rather than being packaged into one late game card that they might not even need to get to play. They might not need to play, they might not get to play. So I mean, an 8 mana 4/8 with Blast and Flying is going to be really solid. I'm not sure right off the top of my head, I'm not really sure of what the implications of having 8 HP versus 7 HP might be. It won't die to, let me see, it would still die to triple Phoenix Fire. It's still going to die to hard removal, but I suppose with a change like this, when you drop it in the late game, that 1 extra HP could mean the difference of it sticking on the board or not. And so that's something to think about. But again, I'm hoping that with this Grandmaster Noshrak nerf, it's not going to affect Vitruvian too much because they don't see a lot of play. And the archetypes that are being played right now and are on the ladder don't rely on this card so much as an in-game finisher. So this is, again, prepping for the future, but won't affect currently played decks the way the Windblade Adept nerf will. And so finally, moving on, we have Meltdown. Ladies and gentlemen, they took all of the nerf suggestions and they packaged them into one big ass nerf for this cancerous card. Meltdown increased from 7 to 8 mana. Its stats are nerfed from a 7/7 to a 6/6. Its ability now does 6 damage instead of 7 damage. We have nerfs all across the board. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, friends and enemies, the king has been perhaps not dethroned, but it's definitely been declawed. I want to specifically read this paragraph and see what they have to say about this. While we still believe randomness can produce interesting and dynamic gameplay, Meltdown is too frequently being used as the finisher of choice in deciding the outcome of close games. We're increasing its mana cost and decreasing its stats to lower its power level a bit and make room for a wider variety of late game card choices. I couldn't have said it better myself. For the last couple weeks, I've actually been cooking up a Meltdown design talk, and this was one of the points I was going to touch on in that video, that when you're playing Duelyst, there's games where you get the perfect draw or your opponent gets like a really, really shitty draw and you win basically automatically, right? You just completely stomp them in and you win. Your opponent doesn't draw the answers they need to deal with what you're doing, or you just get the perfect sequence to deal with what they're trying to do and you just kill them. Your deck just goes off, does exactly what it's meant to do, and you win. Vice versa, the same thing can happen to you, where you get a really bad draw, or your opponent draws all the perfect cards they need to counter what you're trying to do, or they get their perfect ridiculous draw, and they just win the game basically automatically, we'll say. There's certain games, no matter what you do, you're going to lose. There's certain games that no matter what your opponent does, they're going to lose, and you will get that win. What really matters in Duelyst is the games that are close, are the games where you and your opponent are playing back and forth, and it's coming down to, it's coming down to matchup knowledge, decision making, forethought, all of those factors coming together, thinking on your feet, anticipating what your opponent's going to do, working with what cards you have, really, really key replaces, like the meat and potatoes of Duelyst that we've all come to know and love. Those close games is where your rank is decided. And Meltdown, I want to highlight this again. It decides the outcome of close games. When games are neck and neck, and then you just play an RNG card to decide that close game, rather than having to actually get that win from your opponent, these close games that actually matter in terms of, who is climbing the ladder and who isn't. That's what Meltdown was detracting from Duelyst. It was taking away the competitive integrity of Duelyst, right? It was really a spitting in the face of a lot of those really close games. And don't get me wrong, it was important where your opponent could like prep the board and say, okay, well, Meltdown, they can drop it down to a 100% chance that Meltdown goes face and they finish you. That's cool. Or they can maybe narrow the results down to a 50-50 where if it kills your minion, that's good. If it hits you in the face, that's good too. You know what I mean? They're prepping the board so that Meltdown's randomness plays more favorably for them, and then you as the opponent can play a couple minions on the board to lower the chances of Meltdown getting a favorable outcome. And we've seen some cases where, especially in high level play, in tournament play, where Meltdown will just come down as a Hail Mary and decide the game, and it's very meme-tastic to say the least. But I'm really glad that they respect this line right here, where again, close games. Meltdown, there's games where Meltdown is just going to it's the finisher, but they're already ahead on board. They're gonna beat your face in with like 3 Owl Beast Sages that are closing the distance that you can't deal with, or they're just gonna. It was either they were gonna slowly grind you out anyway. Meltdown was just a burst finisher to finish that. But I don't want to get sucked down into I'm not going to make this into a Meltdown discussion video. I'm really glad to see the nerf. Hopefully players will start gravitating towards other late game options. With Meltdown being 8 mana, that means that playing it and using the Blood Surge in the same turn will now be exclusively a 9 mana play. This is going to be played in the very, very late game as a finisher. No longer will you be able to ramp to Meltdown as effectively and drop this early in the game and start having repeated Meltdown procs just wear your opponent out. Furthermore, with Meltdown being a 6/6, it's going to be much easier to remove it. Not only was Meltdown's initial ability like really crazy, the fact that it was a 7/7 made it so that you couldn't approach your opponent any longer to clear Meltdown's body to actually kill it. You had to have some sort of ranged direct answer for Meltdown. And so with Meltdown being a 6/6, you'll be able to contest it with maybe just a handful of minions. You might be able to take, that 6 damage on your face a little bit easier. This will die to like double Phoenix Fire now, or Macantor plus Greater Fortitude. It's still going to be hard to deal with for sure, because as an 8 mana minion, it does need to have a decent body of some kind. But I'm just really glad that it's given players a lot more breathing room. It's still going to be meme-tastic. The pasta will never die. The Doctor Doom memes will never die. But at the very least, we perhaps will be seeing a little bit less of this card. And just some other stuff at the end. We only care about these balance changes, but we're gonna just quickly. Ooh, more Codex chapters. That's pretty cool. Listen. For anybody watching this video who has not taken the time to listen to the Codex chapters, you're really missing out. I did not listen to the Codex chapters forever. Like, I was like, oh man, I really want to sit down and listen to the Codex, but I just would be doing something else, because you have the Duelyst client open, and it's so hard to have the game in front of you and make the decision to say, I have this open, but instead of playing the game, I want to sit down and listen to a guy narrate a story to me. And it's really solid. So you're definitely not going to be. It's time well spent to listen to the Codex. It's really well written, really well narrated, and you get to hear the official pronunciations of a lot of units. It's actually Alcuin. It's not Alcuin. Unfortunately, I'm still going to say Alcuin until the day I die, because it's engraved in my brain. But if you listen to the Codex, you'll hear the narrator say that it's Alcuin, I believe, and that's really hilarious. They've got bug fixes, adjusted turn timer behavior to better handle actions submitted in the final few seconds of your turn. This is actually enormous, because this might need a little bit of clarification. In Duelyst, when the timer is ticking down and you're just about to run out of time at the end of your turn, and you try to put in those last little bit of actions, the timer would run out, because if your action wasn't properly queued, your turn would just end, and it wouldn't compensate for those actions being put into the queue to go off, so to speak. Furthermore, in Hearthstone, they have the rope system. That's why when you're running out of time at the end of your turn, they say that you're roping. In Hearthstone, a rope unfurls across the screen and it burns like a fuse to indicate the end of your turn. And what Hearthstone does is that when the fuse is just about to burn out, it sits at almost burnt out for a couple seconds. They actually stuff a few more seconds visually into the end of that animation, so that you know that you're about to run out of time, but it gives you more seconds to react to that moment when you're about to run out of time. And so that's when you want to think as long as possible. You want to use as much time as possible thinking about your turn before you queue up your actions. And so by adding a delay like that to the very end of the timer, it gives you a buffer to quickly rapid fire input all of those inputs that you just processed in your brain and looked at the board state. So very smart change. This is something that has been requested for a long time. Boulder Breacher fixes compressed multiple stat changes within a short window into a single stat change. This is nice, where if a minion gets a bunch of buffs, it's just going to give them one big number instead of flashing +1/+1 over and over again on the screen. iOS beta going up to wider testing. Android being prepped for initial testing. Additional game modes is in the roadmap, and expansions also in the roadmap. All right, wow, this video ended up being a little bit longer than I thought it would be, but there's been some very key changes in this patch. I thank the devs for finally listening to our prayers. Okay, wait. Let me not say that. They are listening, right? But they have to make sure that they aren't too hasty with the changes. I'm pretty sure that these changes were probably locked in a long time ago, and then finally this patch is coming around so that they can release them now that they finally settled on everything. And could you imagine, like, saying everybody's crying for Meltdown nerfs and feeble nerfs, which were my two main things. Kalo was definitely on my shit list. Kalo and Spectral Revenant are like my two least favorite cards in the game, just about. And I was not really expecting to ever see a Shadow Sister Kalo nerf. I thought that it was too important to Kasava, but they are listening to us, guys. We just need to wait for them to get around to it. And honestly, keep the train going. I would like to see Meltdown nerfed even further. I think it should be a 6/5. I know that they wanted to make it a 7/7/7/7 and have like this really clean numerical thing going on, but mix these numbers all the way the hell up. Make Meltdown not be able to move. Make Meltdown only have 3 base attack or something. Like, just make it all about this random ability. Like, if you want to play the meme-tastic take the shot Piglet card, then you do that, but it shouldn't have such an impactful ability at all. But anyway, that's all the time we have for today, and I'll see you next time in the new post-nerf world of Duelyst. You have a good one.